letting everyone in.
Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. Feel free to use the chat if you want. I'm Sperry from Project Look Sharp. And we'll get started just in a couple of minutes, giving folks time to come in. And Kayla, do we have a hard end time?
Great question. Not necessarily. If you go a couple minutes over, that's totally fine. There is another session that does start at 6 p.m.
Okay.
So I should just note that we don't want to go too much over just because we don't want to conflict with that one. But
and if there's individual people, who want to stay on and check in, is that going to interfere or no? If it's just a couple of people, that's not going to interfere.
No, that's totally fine.
Great. Good to know. Hey, Donnell.
Hello, happy Media Literacy Week.
Yes, to you too. I know you're busy.
We are for sure.
I just read an article of yours on the plane from Arizona yesterday about special education. Thank you for that.
Oh yeah, awesome.
And folks could also write in the chat, just say where you're from or what your role is. While we're waiting for quorum. And I'm not seeing anything in the chat. Josh, will you enter into the chat just so that we can see that it's working? Taylor, are you seeing anything in the chat?
I was just about to type something, but it looks like Reed beat me to it.
A librarian, wonderful, Stacy. We're doing a lot of work with librarians all throughout New York State. Go onto our website and take a look at the What's New ML3. Ed Tech, NYU, great. Hey, Beth, Central New York. 6th grade, wonderful. Yay for librarians. People can share where they're from. And we'll get going. Cincinnati, all right. Oh, we got a bunch of librarians. Secondary social studies. Wonderful. You're in the right spot. And no librarians too. And Danelle's in from St. Louis. The librarians in upstate New York all morning today. It was exciting. Kayla, what do you think? It's 2 after. Should we get going?
Yeah, why not? Looks like we've got most of the people in, and I'm sure others will trickle in as we get started.
Great, great, great. Okay, I'm going to share screen, and I'm going to hope that this works. Actually, let me go to the right place. Okay. No, wrong place. Okay. One more time. All right. That looking right, Kayla?
Sure does.
Great. So I'm Chris Sperry, delighted to be with you on this Media Literacy Week, thanks to Namely and the incredible work of that growing organization to help spread the word and the pedagogy and the importance of media literacy. So I'm going to keep the chat up for folks to be able to communicate as well. There's going to be some interactivity with this, but I am from Project Look Sharp, which is a not-for-profit organization that Cindy Scheib founded with myself and others more than 2 decades ago to support teachers to integrate media literacy throughout the curriculum. And we're focusing on resources. That's why a bunch of the librarians are here. And everything that you're going to see today is free online with the work that we're sharing. But I'm going to start with a couple premises in terms of our work. that media messages are everywhere, and it's important for us to recognize that media isn't just Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. It's not just what appears on our cell phone, that media is also books, that it is statues and maps and paintings. It's the money we have in our pockets. It's stamps, it's signs, it's advertisements that are ubiquitous everywhere. Because once we think about media that way, then our goal is to teach students to read their worlds, to read their mediated worlds in particular, the ways in which messages are communicated to them in all different forms. And we have a particular interest and focus on kind of new media, in part because it tends to be scarier. And it also is where young people are at. But let's keep in mind, young people are watching a tremendous amount of TV, kind of an older media. They live in a hyper-mediated age where almost 10 hours a day of media use for young people. And that doesn't count any time in school. It doesn't count time for school work. So an extraordinary amount of time. And that statistic from Common Sense Media was in 2015. And we know the extraordinary growth that has happened since 2015. So it is everywhere. And by the way, in that 9 hours and 49 minutes, almost 4 hours of that is video, what they call television, which is YouTube and TikTok, et cetera. So an older media form. 2.5 hours of that is recorded music. Goes back to my grandparents' time, in essence, that media form. So while we focus a lot on social media for good reasons, let's not forget the other media forms. And of course, the inundation of media has saturated our young people's lives through new technologies like smartphones that they're carrying around with us 24/7. So it's not only the growth of new media forms, it's the amount of time young people are spending, but it's also the access that they have. So you know that. What we're going to focus on today is this concept of teaching habits of questioning. That's the focus of this work, is habits of questioning. And habits meaning things that students will do automatically, that we have trained, have taught, have worked with them so that they automatically ask certain questions. Who created this? For what purpose? How do I interpret this? Is this credible or not? What techniques are they using? These key media literacy questions that you can find on the Project Look Sharp website, the first document I'm going to share with you. And I've updated this very recently, but I want you to think about these kinds of questions that you can use in your work. Librarians sharing it with your teachers, doing it with your students yourself, the teachers here, and Faith Rogo, who has collaborated with Cindy Scheib and myself on this continual iteration, says, don't call them key questions like we often hear in other arenas. It's really categories and examples of questions that you can use when decoding any kind of media. So you should be thinking about whether authorship and economics is critical, or effects and interpretations, or for this document, it's techniques and context or responses are most critical. And then think about what questions you could ask about that particular document. So these are sample questions. And equally important is, what do you then follow up with if you're in a classroom? And a student says, well, I think this says something about white people, that they are X. Well, what's your evidence? Where did you see that in the document? How could you find that out? Why might that matter? Those follow-up questions are equally important. So I encourage you to check out this on the Project Look Sharp website. It's on the homepage under Handouts, Key Questions, and we will be using this continually throughout the day. So this work must be repeated in all subjects, certainly in diverse subjects, and in all levels. So from pre-K and kindergarten, what are the appropriate questions to ask? And Faith Rogo has on our website a version of those key questions for early elementary. We just posted that in the last couple of months. For media production teachers, we have a version for students to ask about their own creations when they create media. So we want to be doing this in all different subjects and grade levels. But teachers say, and they did 26 years ago when we started Project Look Sharp, I don't have the time. I don't have the time to find the right documents that tie specifically to the curriculum that I need to teach. We know this curriculum must be, this media literacy integration must be curriculum driven. Otherwise, it's just going to be, an exception. But for it to be truly integrated, it has to help teachers to teach what they're already teaching. It has to help them to teach English language arts, to teach social studies, health, science, math, and they need to do it repeatedly at different subject areas and grade levels. Those are our premises behind this work, because we believe that question-based media analysis integrated across the curriculum will give all students these habits that we need for multiple purposes. So let's jump right into our first, what we call constructivist media decoding. And I'm going to ask you to begin working in the chat around this. And again, this is curriculum driven from the objectives and goals of the teachers. And in this case, the objectives are for a social studies unit in 4th grade about learning about first contact. This came from 4th grade teachers who had tried to teach about understanding cultural perspective and point of view with textbooks, and it didn't work, particularly with their ENL students and their special ed students. So they came to us and said, can we do a media literacy activity that works effectively with all of our students, that has them learn about first contact and apply their knowledge and understand cultural perspective? But also we did a gap analysis of our ELA Regents exams in New York State, and they have a hard time developing conclusions and providing evidence from a document. Can you help us work with that? So you're going to be 4th graders. Do the best you can to respond as a 4th grader to this question. All right, 4th graders. Let's start with this image. It is De Soto's discovery of the Mississippi. This is a painting from many, many years ago, 1855 it was made. And we've been talking about adjectives in this class. Give me an adjective to describe how De Soto is shown in this painting. And of course, you'd be doing this face-to-face in person with students. So start entering into the chat. Fancy, important, powerful, powerful. Okay, we've got 2 powerfuls. Let's pause there for a minute. I want you to give me a little evidence. Now, other people, if you agree, powerful, what shows him as powerful? How was this image constructed to show that the man in the middle on the horse, De Soto, is powerful? What's your evidence in the document that he is powerful? He's in the middle and he's higher than everyone else. Great. Jelena, I might probe down in my classroom. White horse, why does that give him power? He's higher than everyone else. Great, Megan, thanks. Other folks, he's in the middle. Cowering. Ooh, that's a good 4th grade term. I might ask Kathy to say, what do you mean by cowering, Kathy? His clothes are important. The space, Beth, I'd have you talk about, what do you mean the space around him? How does that give him power? And Chloe, how do you see him in control? And what I would have you do is I'd have you teach each other. I'd have John explain what he means by, or Kathy, what you mean by showing fear. And describe for the other students in the class, John, how his posture gives him power, how his hat might be different to give him power. So I'd be using my probing to have students teach each other from their developmental perspective about how this image is crafted and constructed to communicate that he has power in this image. Terrific job. So we're not getting to the probing, but I'm describing what I would do as a teacher. Now, I want to get to another key question. From whose perspective do you think 4th graders, from whose perspective, and you can answer in the chat, do you think this painting is from? From whose perspective is this painting from? The Native Americans, the Europeans? What do you think? And I might actually do a poll right now about that. So other people, do you think it's from Native American, from Europeans? Brett, I won't go with that 4th grade comment right now, but, or I might at the time, I'd have to see. What do you think from a Native American perspective, from the European perspective? And I might have the students talk to each other. Why do you see this as coming from a European perspective? And they'd be talking about, well, he's powerful. The Europeans are shown as powerful. And the native people are shown as kind of weak or vulnerable. And I may probe down on the word vulnerable. What do you mean by vulnerable? And have them really explore that idea. And then I might introduce the title, Discovery of the Mississippi. Does that come from a particular perspective, fourth graders? Discovery of the Mississippi. And that's a closed question, yes or no. And if we get a lot of yeses, how does that reflect a European perspective? Discovery of the Mississippi in that language. So now, fourth graders, I'm going to change. From whose perspective is this painting about first contact? Do you think this is from a European perspective or from a Native American perspective? And why, Kathy, do you think this is from a Native American perspective? And I could have you in the class describe why you think this might be. It's from inside their home. It's seeing their perspective. And then I might ask another question, which is, what are the messages about first contact here? How are the Europeans shown in this painting? And the students at fourth grade will identify, well, they have no faces, they're black, and they're kind of surrounded by red, and maybe what that means. And the native people seem afraid. And I'd have you give your evidence in the document for why they might be afraid there. So I would have them unearth the perspective and the point of view of the European painting and the Native American painting to get at cultural perspective and point of view, for students to continually give evidence to back up their position and to demonstrate their knowledge about first contact. But you could use the same set of documents for 11th grade US history, applying knowledge of historical primary documents and understanding and identifying historical context and reflecting on the impact of identity. And again, working effectively with all students. So let's go and have you be 11th graders. So you've just talked about this Discovery of the Mississippi painting. You've talked to me about the perspective there. This was written in 1855. 1855, US history students. What was going on in this country? Anybody know when the Civil War started? You can put it in the chat. Anybody know when the Civil War started? So this is before the Civil War. Yeah, so this is before the Civil War and after the Mexican-American War. So were we at peace in this country? What was happening in the United States that provides the historical context of this painting, 1855? What was going on, class? Anybody? Debate over slaves and free, correct. And in what other historical context shaped this narrative, this story? Native relocations. And I would probe down with something to say, what do you mean by native relocations? And maybe have you teach the rest of the class. Say a little bit about what that means, native relocations. Anybody else? We've been talking about this time period in US history. What was happening in this country and the relations between native peoples and Europeans that might provide the historical context for 1855. And I'd be looking for you in the class to identify things like manifest destiny. And I would then call on someone who said, yeah, manifest destiny. Well, tell us about that. What do you mean manifest destiny? How does this reflect a view of manifest destiny here? So I'm using this media document to teach content, but also historical context. So this is also the context. This painting was commissioned by the US Congress. It hangs in the rotunda of the US Capitol building, one of only 8 paintings telling US history. Why would the United States Congress in 1855 have presented this view or commissioned this view of US history? I'm not going to have you answer that right now, but that would get at the idea of historical context. But let's also think of a different historical context. This picture was taken from an elementary history textbook. And if you look at this picture, it's not the same as the full mural. In fact, what was cropped out, and you could use the chat, what was cropped out for the elementary school history textbook, The Cross. And I would then again probe down with Megan. Megan, why do you think the cross was cropped out? And the students might talk about, in 11th grade US history, about separation of church and state and the different context of 1855 and of 2022. But I want to go with another context. This painting by Jonathan Wormday, who is a Pueblo native artist, he painted this in 1991 in anticipation of an anniversary the next year. What anniversary was he painting this in anticipation of? What was the context of 1992? Columbus. And I probed down, John, what do you mean by Columbus? And I think John would respond, well, it would be the 500th anniversary of Columbus. Why might Jonathan Wormday have created this painting? And why might Jonathan Wormday have named it The Last Supper? What's his perspective? Now, I want to say, given my students, I might not choose to introduce that title, The Last Supper, if I felt like it was not safe in my classroom because of students' religious identity and orientation, or I might not introduce this entire activity if I had a class where it wouldn't be safe for, let's say, the native students in the class to, enter into these conversations. So as we use the power of media in our classrooms, we must always be thinking not about what's comfortable for us and our students, but what's safe for us and our students. And if they're ready for it, to drill down on why is Jonathan Wormday titled this The Last Supper? And then finally, class, my last question for you today is, how might your background, your ethnicity, your cultural or religious identity influence how you interpret the messages in these two paintings? And have, I hope, a powerful conversation about the ways in which our backgrounds and our identities influence how we see different media. Because this is an important, critical capability, habit on the part of students to think, how do I interpret this from my own lens? And how might other people interpret it differently from their lenses? So when we think about the role of social media today, that habit of asking metacognitive questions becomes absolutely critical. So my objectives, the objectives for the 11th grade, reflecting on the impact of identity on interpretation, applying knowledge to primary understanding historical context, a classic social studies standard, and working effectively with all students. These are the subject area objectives that are driving this work. So why think about this approach? It teaches to what teachers have to teach to, knowledge and skills and standards in their subject area. It engages all students. It's adaptable. You can do 7-minute little activities, or you can pull it through a whole class. It teaches these habits of critical thinking. It's particularly effective with challenging topics because the students are doing the analysis, as opposed to me telling students what the analysis is or what to think. It builds their agency, it builds their reflection, and it can really build powerful and thoughtful classroom community. We call this constructivist media decoding, based on the concept that students I can't fill students up with knowledge. They construct their own understanding, but I can facilitate their understanding by having them talk to each other, tied to my objectives, the documents I'm choosing, the questions I'm asking, where I choose to probe. It is question-based. It's starting, at least, with me asking the questions as the teacher. But as we move on, we can ask students, what questions do you want to ask about this? But it's not open-ended. It's not, what do you feel? What do you hear here? It is focused on the content area objectives, the subject area objectives, the media literacy objectives, but it's based on students' meaning making, not on ours. And it is fundamentally teaching them to read the world collectively as a group, their application of knowledge through their interpretation of all different kinds of media. So when we started doing this work many, many years ago, 25 years ago, teachers said, I can do this. I can teach to my exams in science, and I can teach to certain math concepts, and I can teach to health in the elementary level, and I can teach to social studies at all different grade levels, but I don't have the time to find the right documents to do this work. And we heard, folks, I'm going to stop share for a minute, and I am going to go to my video, and I am going to take us to the Project Look Sharp website. Are we seeing that, Kayla?
Yep.
Great. And our response 25 years ago was, yeah, we need to do, I agree, we need to do that. We need to create lessons. So if I were to hit search on our website, what will come up is 638 hits. If I just want to see lessons, I hit search and I get 566 lessons that we've been putting together to give teachers the media documents, and we apply fair use to all of these. So we're breaking copyright law with the purpose of critique and criticism in an educational context. So we're doing that to provide all these materials for free to folks. These are just some of the newest lessons. Global perspectives through movie posters, America through music videos, censoring Seuss for you librarians, cancel culture or culture of respect. How much fruit is in this drink for lower elementary students, analyzing packaging. Same thing with cereal or dinosaurs, what's true and what's not true about these different media forms, a video game, a TV program, an advertisement, a nonfiction book, or for high school social studies, paintings of Louis XIV. What can you tell from a book cover for early elementary students? So many, of course, 500, but you can put in a key word like, let's say, disinformation, and hit search, and you can narrow it down to, in this case, 34 lessons. But let's filter our search for age grade level, and let's just do middle school and disinformation. Update the search. There are 8. Football and concussions, conspiracy theories about COVID-19, the death of Kobe Bryant, trusting web videos, the truth about coronavirus, YouTube recommendations, what do I do? Spotting fake news. So this is what we've been busy doing with grant funding, is to try to find and work with educators to create lessons. We're doing this kind of crowdsourced to a great extent for teaching this work. Here is a TikTok video from a librarian about our work that someone said, hey, have you seen this? I'll let Lindsay tell her story.
It's National News Literacy Week, and if you've been around for the last 6 years, you know just how important news literacy is. So I'm sharing my favorite resources for teaching news literacy in your classrooms. First up is Project Look Sharp out of Ithaca College. They have over 500 media literacy lessons that you can search by keyword, subject, or age and grade level. These media literacy lessons are for every single subject area. Here's one of my favorites that we use all the time in global studies. And in this lesson, students analyze National Geographic covers to draw conclusions about how we stereotype African civilizations. You can see that this lesson includes PowerPoint, student handout, teaching guide, and activity plan. Let's take a peek at the activity plan that comes with the Africa lesson. It tells me grade levels, it gives me objectives, it tells me what standards it aligns to. I've got some vocabulary. It talks about the media that's included in a separate file. It tells me how to do this. It gives me links to the PowerPoints and some websites for additional procedures. It tells me the time for the activity, and then it goes ahead and it walks me through the procedures for running this lesson and what kinds of questions to ask students. That's something I really love about the Project Look Sharp lessons. They're all based on these series of inquiry questions that students answer as they attempt to decode the media. So rather than the teacher telling them the answer, students are arriving at their answers on their own. Let's look at another lesson. This lesson's for upper elementary grades and it has a science focus. And in this lesson, students are comparing messages in different news sources about the impact of agriculture on freshwater activities. With every lesson plan, you get all of the media. So here's an example of the PowerPoint that goes with this lesson. You can see some of the news articles that students analyze during this lesson. Best of all, Project Look Sharp is totally free. You have access to all of these great lessons plans, resources, objectives on their website, and you just create an account. No cost involved.
All right. Thank you, Lindsay, for that. I am going to share screen and go back to the slides. So part of what we have been hearing from teachers is it's so overwhelming. There's so many choices. Can't you just tell me one lesson to get started with? So I am actually, again, going to take you back to our website. We just posted this. We've been working on this for about 6 months, getting started with media decoding. Librarians, this came from you asking us to make it simple and accessible for teachers. So depending upon what teacher you are, librarians, what teachers you're working with or your own, let's go to middle school. And you can say, oh, I'm interested in civics and government or ELA or library and information literacy. Let's try that. And you'll get this starter kit, which will tell you a little bit about what constructivist media decoding is, what the approach is, mentions the resources. Then it gives you, for instance, Project Look Sharp Lessons is that 2-minute video I just played for you. This is high school students talking about media literacy. This is a short example from a classroom tied to this grade level and subject area. This is the media literacy questions handout I mentioned earlier. This is a guide to tell you one page, how to set this up, what to look for in a media decoding. And then here is selecting lessons. You got 3 choices. You could search the Project Look Sharp website, and this link will take you to the 52 lessons specifically for library and information literacy for middle school. That's still a lot of lessons. So you could make the second choice, which is to go to our guide for middle school librarians that limits the number of lessons that are targeted towards that level, and then gives other information about the kind of resources available for middle school librarians. But if you just want a few lesson ideas, then we just give you a few: The Death of Kobe Bryant, Spotting Fake News, Greta Meets Malala, for you to check out. Then we have our example media decoding plans. If you were doing the Greta Meets Malala lesson, what's a very simple plan to do a 10-minute to 20-minute decoding, where it starts with your objectives, goes to the documents, these 2 short videos, what questions would you ask, and a probe plan. Where would you probe down and ask students to follow up their thinking so that they can teach each other about this work? And finally, the last thing is a self-evaluation checklist for this work. Did I have clear objectives? Did my probing align with my objectives? Were my documents accessible to students? Was there emotional impact that was unanticipated? Were my questions aligned with my objectives, etc., for you and for teachers to reflect on the decoding process? That is the starter kit for media decoding. And I'm going to take us back to the slides. There's one other resource I want to let you know about on our website. It is listed under our approach. It is the DIY guide, the do-it-yourself guide, which has a lot of information about how you can create your own lessons, not rely upon Project Look Sharp's lessons if you want to go in that direction. In the little bit of time we have, I also want to connect to some important concepts in media literacy and media decoding related to polarization, disinformation. If you want to know more information about this, Cindy Scheib and I have a new book out, Teaching Students to Decode the World, that has a whole section on this work today. We call that a product placement. Of everything I'm showing you today, it's the only thing that costs money. It's from ASCD. How can media decoding help our students become better at judging truth claims in the media? I'm going to reference this research by Joe Kahn and Ben Boyer from 2016, really important research in the field of media literacy. In this research, they studied young people's ability to evaluate how high school students identified what's true and what's not true. And they compared the abilities of students with high level of political knowledge with students with low levels of political knowledge. In the chat, which group do you think was better able to identify what's true or not true in politics? Students who knew a ton about politics, or students who knew almost nothing? Students who A, got high grades in my class, were always asking questions, or B, students who were just looking to get a D and just kind of hopefully pass the class was their goal. And I'm lost my chat. There we are. What do you think? Students with high level. It would certainly make sense that the students who know more would be better at figuring it out. But Rachel's saying low, a low level. And in fact, what Kahn and Boyer discovered is that the students who knew a ton were no better at identifying what's true because of confirmation bias, because they took what they knew and they used their motivated reasoning to say, well, I have other information, and that's not a credible source. If they're, left-leaning, they might say, well, fuck, snooze, we all know that that's garbage and it's not true, and vice versa about CNBC or about Democracy Now, et cetera. And they say, well, I have information that counters that. So they were no better able to identify what was true and not true than students who know very little. So it kind of pokes a hole into our concept that if students only paid attention and only listened and they learned, they would be able to figure out what's true. And unfortunately, it's not true. But what Kahn and Boyer discovered is that media literacy strategies that did help students to evaluate what's true were those strategies that had students considered different perspectives and points of view, that had students justify their own opinions. Why do I believe the way that I do? And thirdly, and I think most importantly, reflect on their own thinking. Unfortunately, this is not built into the social studies and science, English language arts standards very clearly at all. It's built into early elementary, interestingly enough. Why are you reacting the way that you did? But we tend to forget about feelings and identity when students get older, and it drives their thinking, their polarized thinking in particular. So we need to be thinking about how do we get students to do this kind of work. So I am going to show you a demonstration video. If you go on our website to demonstration videos, it's on the homepage. You can choose 20, and we'll have more coming soon in early elementary and middle school, of these 5 to 12-minute videos. I'm going to show you a little bit of one of these videos on our website, and you can use these for professional development work, etc. So hopefully this is going to work. Yes, this is about climate change. So this could be a science one. Kayla, tell me if we're hearing it okay, once the sound comes up. I'm going to play a short clip
Yep, can hear it just fine.
This film called The Great Global Warming Swindle, which challenges the position that it's human contributions to CO2 that cause climate change. I want you to think about what the key messages are in this clip about global warming and the role of anthropogenic human-caused CO2. And I also want you to take a look simultaneously about the kind of techniques that the filmmakers are using to communicate their messages.
Volcanoes produce more CO2 each year than all the factories and cars and planes and other sources of man-made carbon dioxide put together. More still comes from animals and bacteria, which produce about 150 gigatons of CO2 each year, compared to a mere 6.5 gigatons from humans. An even larger source of CO2 is dying vegetation, from falling leaves, for example, in the autumn. But the biggest source of CO2 by far is the oceans.
Okay, just a short clip. What are the key messages in that little 30 seconds that you saw about anthropogenic CO2? Anybody? What are the messages about the role of CO2 in climate change? Yeah, Luciano?
A lot more CO2 gets put into the atmosphere from the natural world than what comes from humans. Like they said that a mere 6.2 gigatons comes from humans, whereas a bunch of other stuff came from.
Excellent. Anybody want to add to that? What's implied by that clip? Yeah, Josh.
The way it was animated and the human portion, it looked like it belonged there, and all the animals with all the big arrows coming up made them seem like it was out of place. Like, oh, trees, they're bad, they produce CO2. And that seemed a bit out of the ordinary to me.
Interesting. Anybody else? Any reactions? Francesca?
It also seemed to imply that the whole debate about humans contributing to global warming is like dramatized, yeah.
How did it do that? How did the film do that?
Well, it started by offering statistical comparisons between the amount of CO2 that humans put into the air and other animals and stuff like that. And I mean, I don't agree with this filmmaker's perspective personally, but they did a good job in like comparing the two in a light that made it seem that humans weren't contributing very much.
Terrific. Francesca?
I think what really.
I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. So I'm focusing in on the issue of CO2 and for my science lesson. And then this student, Alana, jumps in and takes me off of my plan, my goals to really deep dive as a science teacher on anthropogenic CO2 and the reality. So I'm going to let you see what Alana does.
Also,
Alana, sorry.
Well, what I think is interesting is actually our reactions to it, because I think we all have a lot of opinions on this topic, so we think that our opinion is the right opinion. So as soon as we see something challenging that, we're going to immediately start to kind of say that it's propaganda or start disregarding it. And I think we could do that for a video that's, you know, an inconvenient truth, which is supporting our opinion mainly. And we could look at that and start calling that propaganda as well. And I mean, personally, I really dislike this video. I think that there's a lot of lies, but I think that what the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, okay, who made this? What is their purpose for making this? What are my own biases, and how is that informing my opinion of this video?
Okay, so I heard. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. So Alana is practicing metacognition. She is thinking about her own reactions to this video. And she knows her peers, and she knows their point of view and perspective. So she is taking the questions that I've been asking her, and that and she's now turning them back to the class and internalizing those and showing habits of metacognition or self-reflection. We need to practice with our students these kinds of questions, these metacognitive questions. How does this make me feel? Do I have an open mind or not on this? What do I learn about myself from my own interpretation, my own reactions to this? Will I pass this on to others? Why would I? Why would I not? And how does my own identity shape my interpretations? These questions, and Kayla, we're seeing the PowerPoint up okay? These questions, yep. These questions come from the RAND Corporation Truth Decay study of what do high school students need, the questions they need to be asking and have asked of them in order to cope with the polarized disinformation that's coming through in the world. So how can we as educators have our students be more metacognitive about their thinking? One answer is by probing with them with these kinds of questions. I am going to bring closure to this and give a little bit of time for discussion and Q&A by having you watch one more short video. In this case, it is high school students speaking about media literacy and this work. Kayla, we're seeing this okay?
Yes, we are.
Thanks.
Media literacy is different than different other forms of teaching because it's literally like teaching you how to learn.
I never knew how curious of a person I was in my own learning, or like how interested I was in things that I never thought I would be interested in until I started looking at it through different mediums.
Media is all around us, and that media is intertwined into our culture and our society, and it really should be a requirement that we should learn with multiple aspects of media, not just books.
In every school, teachers are going to have their own biases, and I think that it's really important for students to be able to create their own opinions.
I can hear other people's opinions, and maybe I can make connections with it, or agree or disagree, so it helps me have more of an open mind.
It doesn't feel like the teacher is just giving you the information. It feels like they're helping you to figure it out for yourself.
It's more interactive. It's more the students doing their own personal thinking as opposed to having a teacher write up on a board, this is the answer.
It should be something that's required, that you understand how, like, where information comes from.
When I'm doing research projects now, I'm going to look at the biases first, and because most of the time students just go straight to the internet and the first thing that pops up in your Google search is the one that you use. But now I think that I'm going to have to really analyze it and understand the bias and then get another point of view.
When you go on and you're expected to write a thesis paper, you already know how to break apart information and how to form your own opinions on it. And you know how to look at all sides, and you know kind of more of what you think is right and wrong.
Media literacy has allowed me to kind of learn that I have my own opinions and that they're different in some cases from what the standard cultural norms are, and that it's okay to have different opinions, that everyone has their own different ideas.
Media literacy has made me realize that there's a lot of perspectives, and just because they disagree doesn't mean that one is wrong or right.
It just changes the way I look at things, everything, not even just TV, computer, iPod. It changes the way my eyes work pretty much. It teaches me how to learn in a sense, because it's teaching me how to watch and how to look, keep a mindful eye, and how to be aware.
You see something in a published magazine and you assume like, oh, well, this must be the truth. This must be what they want me to agree with them. However, like, at least in this school that we go to, I've learned to like question that and to say like just things like why, just ask the question why, and yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to go back and end with the slides and then open it up. Folks want to stay and ask questions or comments. That's on the Project Look Sharp homepage, that 3-minute video. 2 student comments to end on. 10th graders. I have a newfound desire to learn as well as be aware of the world, how it is presented to me, how I perceive it. I feel better prepared for school as well as life in general. That was a response to what has this media literacy work taught you. That was a 10th grader. That young woman has gone on to now be one of the lead policy people in YouTube for medical disinformation. And she emailed me not long ago to say, I did graduate work in this field, but it was what I learned in high school that not only set me on my path, but prepared me for the work that I'm doing. This is my favorite, really my most proud moment in terms of students' comments was in that same class, a special education student who listened to that previous students and others and said, yeah, you're so articulate. I can't really add anything except to say, in most classes, I study equations, but in this class, I was the equation. And that's, I think, a fundamental goal for all of us in this work as educators, is for students learning to be about them at a very, very deep level. So I will stick around and if people have questions or want to check in about any of this work, but please check out the resources at projectlookSharp.org, all free. And hopefully let us know if there are other things that you need in order to do this work. So I'll keep the chat up, and people can stay and unmute if you want to check in at all. So feel free to unmute yourself and to ask any questions or make any comments.
Chris, this is Katie Kavanaugh.
Hey, Katie.
Hi there. Thank you very much for your presentation and the great work you're doing. I'm wondering if you have presented foreign work to high school students.
Sure. So one of our entire kits, and we have not only individual lessons, but kits, for instance, is the history of the Soviet Union, all through government political posters, starting with Lenin's posters under his government. And I think the first one was in 22, but it's all about the kind of history of the revolution, and then posters in Stalin's era, and then through the Cold War, and then Gorbachev's posters. And it's used to teach the history of the Soviet Union, but all through decoding of Soviet posters. As Israeli Arab units that we have, Palestinian Israeli history done through, for instance, Palestinian Israeli children's books about the same land, from different perspectives. I could go on and on and on with international documents being core. And these days, of course, global documents. So we have a whole series of documents on learning English language for people in other countries. And these documents are often in English, but come from other nations, et cetera. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Candace, feel free to unmute.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd raise my hand to make sure that I just don't jump in. But good evening. I am an English 3 and IB and AP educator at the historic Harding University High School in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I consider myself to be a seasoned teacher, but I also know there's a difference being seasoned and being a veteran, because I'm getting pushback from some colleagues about my students doing podcasts, my students doing websites, bringing in media pedagogy into the classroom for all my students, not just my advanced or my IB, but for all students, because this is the way of the land now. And I'm just wondering, what can we do to get those veteran teachers on board? Because our students are going to lack the skills to be competitive in a global market.
Yeah. So let me just respond very quickly by saying you're doing the right thing, Candace. And clearly the pushback is a reflection of that, that you're giving student agency and bringing voice together. And there are going to be people who have a hard time with that, but not the people here, because that's our goal, and not good educators and not the standards. You go to your standards and you're going to speak to the things that you're doing with the students. How do we bring veteran or teachers on board? The thing that we heard from the very, very beginning of Project Look Sharp is, I don't have the time. And I hear things like, well, I'd love to teach like this, but I don't have the time. Well, there is a 5-minute video in the demonstration videos of me teaching students, and I'm not really teaching them, I'm facilitating their learning about the bias in maps, a classic social studies standard. 5 minutes, those students inquire, figure out, and come to the conclusion, wow, maps can have a bias based on what's included and what's left out. They use an Israeli and Palestinian map, back to Kathy's comments earlier, and they unearth that. I challenge any teacher to say in less than 5 minutes, I could nail that objective, and that standard. So for many veterans, we need to show them models of how we can use media literacy to teach what we already need to teach, but be more effective reaching all students, leveling the playing field. I hated school because I had dyslexia around spelling, and it was so text oriented. And if it wasn't for the privileges I had of filmmaking as a little kid, I wouldn't have gotten to a place of realizing, boy, I'm not stupid. I can really do some things. And that allowed me to see the brilliance of my kids in my classes who could take apart the engine of my car, but they couldn't read that book, but they could do analysis. They could take songs and music, and they could take video clips and imagery and do that work. So we need to show teachers how they can more successfully reach more students through this approach than their current approach. And the kids love it, and it's a great way of teaching. And the last thing I'll say is, And some folks, I taught for 40 years, and I understand at some point in your career, it's like, I'm not learning anything more. I'm not doing, pick your low-hanging fruit, pick the new teachers that need that support, need you to help them, pick the new curriculum where they need some new material and go after that, as opposed to trying to get folks to change who may not be up for it.
Thank you.
Sure thing. And I know we have another session starting up. Anybody else, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, please unmute. And otherwise, we will bring closure to this. Any last comments or questions? Thank you, Kathy and Candace and everybody else that's been here. And I'm glad to be doing this work with all of you. Bye-bye. Enjoy the rest of Media Literacy Week.